intention of doing another video, but a lot of people wrote to me and said, look, Donald Rumsfeld's died. He died at 88 of plasma cancer. It was cancer of the bone marrow or something, but he died this week, and a lot of people wrote and said, please do his transition pictures. Normally I wouldn't do this so soon, but he was one of those people who's a historical figure in his own lifetime. So his death is monumental, and naturally people were curious. He's had, in many ways, an illustrious career. He's an ex-Princeton guy, an ex-Navy guy who rose to be Secretary of Defense, both under Ford and under G.W. Bush. Eventually, because he was instrumental in starting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and because so many people died on his watch, also because he was in favor of torture. Apparently, one time he learned that in Abu Ghraib, prisoners were being made to stand for 4 hours on the spot without moving. And when he heard this, he goes, so I stand for 8 hours a day. They should be made to stand for longer. And eventually, I think in 2006, he was forced to resign. There was a general's uprising. Some of his generals rose up and said, this guy is incompetent. He should not be allowed to develop strategy for the military. He's useless. Please get rid of him. And he resigned later that year. He did a lot of useful things, like starting a foundation and writing a book, and he also had an app, I think, for some version of solitaire. So as I said, from the outside it would look like he had an incredibly illustrious career, albeit a career marred by some horrible, horrible, damaging and almost sadistic missteps. So I went into his pictures. When I found him in the energy, he was in a very strange fixed position. He was on what looked like a tuning fork. It was a little podium thing that he was standing on, and he was perched rigidly between the two prongs of this restraint. I don't know how he got there, because I didn't see him enter this metaphorical cave thing that I always see. However, I did feel that he didn't just walk in. He came in almost like he'd been fired from a cannon. You know what they used to do in circuses? Many, many years ago, they'd have a guy in a cannon with a helmet on and they'd just fire him across the arena. A bit like that, like he'd been shot in rather than just ambled in. Maybe a reflection of the kind of guy he was. A go-getter. Somebody who was perhaps confident in his decisions even when those decisions were absolutely terrible and detrimental to other human beings. Just arrogantly so. Okay, I'm here. I've arrived. Donald Rumsfeld is in the house. You know, that kind of overconfidence that's largely unwarranted. So he's standing on this tuning fork, rigidly. There's no curiosity. There's no sense of inquiry about where he is. Just, now what? It moves off suddenly. And there's a track in the floor, a zigzag track that takes him up the tunnel, this metaphorical tunnel. Bam, bam, bam. And he just stands there. Goes this way, goes that way. Goes this way, goes that way. Rigid, 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 rigid. No emotion. In the obituaries and the eulogies that were issued, it said that he was a very kind, loving family man. I can't dispute that. But it does seem from the pictures that he was kind and loving to certain kinds of people and not to everybody else, apparently. In fact, I did hear years ago some Muslim cleric perhaps, saying that one day there would be a global caliphate, that Islam would, even if it took centuries or millennia, would eventually consume the world. And we'd all be members of that caliphate. And I always thought back then that maybe these Christian types, and he was a Christian, maybe these Christian types who formed the government under George W. Bush, who again was a born-again Christian, that these people said, we've got to take a stand against Islam on behalf of everything we believe in America. We must take a stand. We cannot let Islam take over the world the way they're promising, the way they're threatening. And I do wonder even now whether some of that thinking of stopping Islam from taking over the world, whether that wasn't fuel in the decisions to go to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because also he was a supporter of fabricated intelligence or massaged intelligence. The kind of stuff that could justify a war when the real intelligence doesn't. But you go with it anyway because you're trying to achieve a bigger end, one that you don't tell people about. That's what I always thought at the time. He goes up this tunnel, unemotional, just takes it as it comes. This is the process. This is what I'm going to go through. Interestingly, there was no washing away of his egoic sins as he went, which so often happens with these people. He just stood there rigidly and let fate take its course. Bam, 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 up the tunnel. To the light. This cave that I always see, this metaphorical space where people reach their finality. Their consciousness as an individual rejoins universal consciousness in this space. The tuning fork podium went around the dome as though he was surveying it. Yeah, show me the whole thing. Give me surveillance. I want to see what the lie of the land is. Just show me this. And it goes around in its groove, this podium, until it goes full circle. He stands there staring directly at the light. A light that has no personality, no features. It's just unconditional love condensed into a small space. And Donald Rumsfeld stares at it, and stares, and it's like a face-off, and remains rigid with his fist clenched on this tuning fork. I'm not going. I'm not going. And he begins to tremble. I could see the image of him trembling. No! No! The very core of him, of his individual consciousness, was so strict and so unshifting and so resolute in his determination to have his way no matter what, that he was not going. But we're talking universal forces here. You can't just say no to something as vast and powerful as the universe, as God. And the pressure that he exacted in this moment, in his resistance to the inevitable, to the finality of his existence as an individual consciousness, this resistance he had caused his face to fracture. There were splits in it. Hairline cracks went up through his features. And in the end, it just burst. Bits of his head came away, revealing a much smaller person on the inside. soft person, a tender heart, a vulnerable creature who had masked this vulnerability with several inches of cement that made him who he was in life. But underneath, he was just the bully with a soft center, afraid. There seemed to be so much fear here. Enough that when he was very young, he must have started building this case around him, this shell, in order to survive. Or in order to feel like he would survive. But once the exterior had split away, what was left was like putty, like Play-Doh, plasticine. There was nothing to it. It was real. It was honest. And thus exposed, he just crumpled, sagged, felt the pressure of control, self-control, self-determination melt away. It's like when you get a perfume box and you open it and there's this beautiful perfume bottle, very well designed, very well shaped, fashioned into something acceptable. But it's what's inside the perfume bottle that you really want. And inside Donald Rumsfeld's perfume bottle was something wonderful that he'd not shown to many people, that he disguised in order to succeed, that he kept hidden away for fear that others would exploit him, belittle him, overrun his beliefs with theirs. There was so much fear here that was now out in the open. It was almost like he was a melted candle. It was like, oh, finally, my soul gets a chance to breathe. And suddenly he felt exhausted. It takes so much of our life force to control the universe, to be caretakers of the cosmos, and we can't do it. Or if we do, it takes a huge toll. Unable to stand up because of fatigue, he leaned on the dome, the symbolic dome that I always see. And as other people have done too, took so much comfort from the warmth, softness, the presence of grace, that he just pulled it over him like a duvet. As I said, others have done this too. It just feels good to be home, to stop the struggle. Pull it over him and just rolled away, leaving the shattered parts of Donald Rumsfeld on the floor of the cave. The universe wanted the real Donald Rumsfeld. It didn't want his achievements. It didn't want his bravado. It didn't want his confidence or his arrogance. It just wanted his soul delivered back to its rightful place. We see this over and over and over again. That the ego has to somehow lose its power in order for the soul to transition effectively. And he was so determined to remain in control and not give an inch that it sapped his very life force. Created a husk of a human being in some ways, at the center of which was the goodness within him. And in the end, like a little toddler who's tired of throwing a tantrum, he just quit, rolled over into a fetal position, and allowed the universe to take over. It was very, very draining. But that's Donald Rumsfeld. Thanks very much, guys. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.